Well, good afternoon, everyone. Tom Balzer here with the Ohio Trucking Association, and welcome to another episode of OTA on the Air, presented by Transport Services. Transport Services is a full-service semi-trailer dealer with locations in Cleveland and Columbus. Since its inception in 1976, Transport Services has grown to over 80 employees and continues to expand. Transport Services focuses on bringing their customers value by offering trailer rental, new and used trailer sales, mobile repair, over 30 service bays, and a parts distribution service. For more information, please go to transportservices.com or contact Brian Brook at 330 573 0401. Again, thank you for attending. We are going to talk today about the economy and some of the work that we've been doing here at OTA with our weekly economic update. And working through that, working through some of the numbers that we've got and numbers that we're seeing with this research that we started doing in the end of March. So we've got a pretty good data set that we're working through. But first, I'd like to talk a little bit about what we're seeing from other economic indicators. And really what it is it's alphabet soup that all starts with COVID. So we talked previously about a V recession and then a U recession, and now Bob Costello with the American Trucking Association is talking about a potential of a W recession, which means we'll see a little bit of growth coming out of it. And then depending on what the states do, we could potentially go back in and then come back out. And I think that that's probably the biggest thing that is hinging on the economy is what these states will do. We saw a number of states either slow down, stop, or regress as far as their economic opening plans, areas such as Texas and Arizona being two very large ones that saw some huge spikes moving forward. And I saw a Twitter feed come out that talks about why we're flattening the curve is to push the infections off to the future. And then now we're in the future and we have all these new infections. And what are we doing again? Well, we're still flattening the curve. And I think that that's the challenge we're going to run into is the question on what's an acceptable level of new growth as far as the level of infections go, and what's the prognosis of those folks, of those new infections coming out, and what do states do to respond to that. So a lot of unknown out there, and I think that's probably the worst news that we have, but that's the news that we have is that really when it comes to economic growth, we have a lot of unknowns out there, and a lot of the data sets that you see as far as projections when it comes to the economic growth is that we don't know. There's a lot of assumptions being made, and any one of these things that changes that could change the outcome of those projections moving forward. So what we saw was GDP did shrink from an annualized rate of 5% in Q1, which is slightly higher than what they estimated that to be. I think the really big numbers with the GDP annualized rate of would be in Q2, and that's going to be the really economic indicator to see just how bad this really was. But what we still continue to see new unemployment applications. So during the third week of June, we saw 1.48 million new applications in the United States for unemployment. So in the past 14 weeks, we've seen 47.1 million workers apply for unemployment benefits. And just to give you a little bit of perspective, the U.S. labor force reached a high right before this in February of 2020 of 1.6 million people. So we're seeing a huge percentage of the American workforce that is on unemployment. And I think that that's one thing when you read the economic data that comes very clear is that the additional benefits that the federal government put in for as far as unemployment claims and a lot of the changes that the states made as far as unemployment claims really showed that that assistance help stave off a lot of the economic damage. Now, the interesting part is in the end of July is that $600 additional payment expires. And interestingly enough, here in Ohio, it's not the 31st of July. It's actually the 25th of July, because the state of Ohio says that a work week is a Saturday to Saturday. And because of the way the calendar lands, that 31st date actually is not extended out past that. So it actually regresses. So here in Ohio, we have a little bit of an interesting legislative issue that really limits that number. But we are going to see that peel off unless the federal government steps in and does something. We saw that kind of a late hour extension of PPP that the Senate did. It's kind of it was kind of surprising that they did that. And the interesting part will be is will the Congress step in and extend out that $600 a week, or are they going to do something like Senator Portman has proposed about doing some sort of bonus to go back to work? Or are they going to do a additional stipend, but at a lesser rate, say $400 a week or $300 a week, or whatever that number may be? But definitely, as you look at the research on the economy, that additional federal assistance did help, I guess, flatten the economic curve or the impact of to the economy. So. In some good news, the ISM Manufacturing Index recorded a 52.6 reading, which is actually a percentage that shows that 52.6% of the respondents saw growth in June, which is much better than what they expected of 49.5, up from 41.5 in April and 43.1 in May. So we are seeing a resurgence in manufacturing. A lot of the discussions that I've had with some of the haulers who in certain particular areas of manufacturing are seeing growth. The automobile industry is back to work, and they're working 6 days a week. So, we are starting to see that economic growth and that manufacturing growth move its way forward. So, why don't we go ahead and dive into the data? Really what I took a look at was when we started off this research, we started asking just 5 questions. What was your loads year over year? What were your loads week over week? And what do you expect the following week to be like? And then 2 questions with employment of, what are your employment numbers week over week, and what do you expect for the following week? So those are the first 5 questions. We have added 2 additional questions, one of which about fleet size, and the other which was about the rates. Are you seeing when you back out the ancillary expense or the ancillary revenues and fuel surcharges? Are you seeing higher revenue or year over year? So when we get to doing the Q3 wrap up here in 3 months, we'll have more data to take a look at. But what we're seeing is year over year number of loads is, we see the kind of the curve peak out in the down 5 to 30%. And that's where we really see the vast majority of that. And then, the secondary side of that is down 30 to 50. So year over year loads are drastically off from what they were in the prior year, as high as 50%. In fact, when we first originally asked this question, why you see that green line in 0% is that when we originally asked this question, we didn't even ask down over 50% because we didn't expect it to be that high. And what we found out talking to carriers is we saw some carriers that are off as much as 80%, year over year. So we added that question and extended that out. But really what you're seeing is this huge downswing in year over year number of loads. And, I know this graphs and all these graphs are a little difficult to read when you start, putting this much data in there. So what I did was I took a look at year over year growth. So I just tabulated up the total of the positive growth, which is anything north of flat, and then the flat rate, and then any negative growth, which is anything less than negative. So when you take a look at The negative growth, the highest we had was a year-over-year negative growth of 84.78% of the respondents said they had some sort of negative downturn in their year-over-year numbers. And that was first part of May, second week of May. And then we saw it again the third week of May. We continue to see it growing forward. And I think a lot of that has to do with some of the increase in freight from last year that seemed to really hit in May and June, which was a little delayed. So we're seeing some significant negative growth across the board on a year-over-year basis. So when we go over the week-over-week numbers, so the question is do you see, what is your week been compared to the week prior? So this is kind of a shorter term metric. So what you're kind of seeing is a lot of this growth come back a little bit. So we're seeing flat and 0 to 5% growth. But that has just been in recent months and in the recent month or so. And so we're starting to see some growth come back on week over week number of loads that are out there. But as you see, the load numbers on the other end of the curves is that down over 50% was really high back in April. So we saw some significant drop-offs in the number of loads on a week over week basis. So there again, we'll take a look at that graph, and that's what shows you is that the negative growth in the end of March, all of April, working its way into May, saw very high levels of negative growth week over week. So loads off 76.6% at its high in that first week in April. So really, we were seeing that. So now we're starting to see the tide turn a little bit, where we're starting to see some positive growth in the first couple weeks here of June. So we're starting to see that switch. The hope is that as we take a look at this chart here 3 months from now, that we see a whole lot more blue lines going up a whole lot higher than that, and the green lines disappear. But we are starting to see that week over week growth turn a little bit into a positive way. So then we asked about what do you anticipate your number of loads will look like next week. Really on the little on the conservative side, but we're seeing a lot of that stuff in the flat market and some up and up to the 0 and 5%. But for the vast majority, people were anticipating loads to be fairly flat. As well as the folks really early on in the research were saying it's going to be down considerably. I think you take a look at May 18th through May 24th of 25.53% saying they anticipated their loads to be down over 50% in the middle of May. So some pretty significant drop-offs on that side as well. When we talk about the March 30th through April 5th one, where that's at 32.87%, that can probably be split out. That was the first time we didn't ask anything over than down over 30. So that can be split out between the down over 30 and the down over 50 kind of category. But yeah, we're seeing we're starting to see, like we saw that on the flip side, the week over week growth is starting to get there. And so that's why we're seeing the shift in the curve over a little bit. So there again, that's what you're going to see right there is, that negative growth is just huge at the start. They anticipated being 70 to 65%. And now we're starting to see that anticipation swing a little bit. Now we did see a spike in this week's research that people were anticipating loads to be down this week, compared to previous weeks. So, that may be short-lived. That may be people getting their stock back in place to reopen and fire up manufacturing again, working our way through that. And so we'll just have to see as the weeks kind of progress how that it's going to end up looking. One thing that I did ask, or I did ask myself as I was doing this research was, I wonder how accurate the estimates are. How accurate was the group at saying, when we take a look at what they thought the next week would bring and what the next week actually brought to them as far as the number of loads. And the group was extremely accurate, less than 1%, so 0.004167% accuracy rate on the estimates of the number of loads from one week to the next as to what they actually were. So so if you take a look at that, this is plus or minus. So if it's on the positive numbers, means they underestimated. And then if there's a negative number, they overestimated. So, people were very almost dead on where their numbers were week over week as far as the estimate goes. So we look at employment numbers. Really what we saw throughout this whole process was, we saw some significant drop-offs in employment, but for the most part, people kept folks on staff. And I think early on, we saw some drops in staff members as far as their number of employees that they had on staff. And so we did see that. We did see a spike in that when PPP came out. But we did see some pretty significant layoffs very early on in this process. The top 2 weeks as far as layoffs go, in the down over 30, the down 15 to 30 was that last week in March and that first week in April, and then that third week in April we started to see some kick-ups of the down 5 to 15%. So, but for the most part, what we're seeing now come out in the research is we are in the 80 to 90 percentile flat number of employees on a week over week basis. So you take a look at that on a growth side of it. There again, you'll see that negative growth was very, very prominent in the first few weeks of this, first 5-6 weeks of this, but then that just kind of fell off a little bit. We did see the spike here in that second week of June, and then this past week saw a spike as well, and that is directly correlated to the loss of number of loads that we saw in the same time frame that was there. There again, we talked about anticipated growth, employment. What does everyone look like as far as what they anticipate the following weeks to look like? And there again, pretty consistent with what the actual is, with vast majority of people not growing, not going up, not going down, and it's just a pretty dead even bell curve. Other than really early on with the huge layoffs that were necessitated by, in some cases, no freight whatsoever. You talk about, some of the particular industries, fuel haulers being one of them. When no one's buying, when everyone's at a stay-at-home order and no one's driving, no one's buying fuel. So therefore, you just don't have that demand that's there for that. And then when the auto plants shut down, you talk to one carrier and they had pretty much every one of their trucks sitting on the fence because they just had no freight because their entire automobile industry had been shut down. So so that is what the anticipated employment. So I ran and here's the growth metric from that perspective as well. Again, you saw the negative growth of what they anticipated, and then that has leveled off, and the flat growth has continued to gain momentum. Again, took a look at how accurate the estimates are, and they're again very accurate. Less than 1%, actually a third of 1% was how accurate the estimates were moving forward. And what you'll see on that same thing is that everyone was very consistent as far as that side of it, but very, very, very consistent. So that's really what I've got for today as far as what we've found out in the economic studies. I wish I had better info for you. As this broadcast continues to move forward, we're going to get some economic folks on in the later parts of July and August to really kind of talk about what that forecast is. But I will tell you that every economist that I've talked to, every fleet that I've talked to, anyone has said that this situation is so fragile right now that anything can happen. Anything can set it off one way or the other. And there's a lot of things that are hanging out there, whether states go back into stay-at-home orders, how states progress when it comes to reopening the economy, as well as, what Congress does as far as financial assistance for those people out of work, how fast people get back to work. There's just so many variables right now that I think if anyone can tell you what the economy is going to do tomorrow, let alone 2-3 months from now, they're kidding themselves, because it is just so absolutely fragile out there that no one's really quite sure, what's going to happen next. Our plan is to continue to do this study every week, and move that forward. And next week, we have Congressman Troy Balderson, who is with Ohio's 12th District, will be joining us on this broadcast. He is on the House Transportation Committee, the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, as well as the House Committee on Small Business. Been a very huge advocate for the trucking industry, and has worked very diligently and hard on a number of issues for the industry when it came to the highway reauthorization bill that just got passed out of the House. So we'll talk to him on the updates and what he's seeing going on in DC. So if there's any questions, please feel free to throw them in the Q&A section, or to reach out to me directly, tom@ohiotrucking.org. And if there are none, which I'm not seeing any, we will definitely continue to keep you all up to date on what we find out about the economy moving forward. As you know, when this survey goes out, it goes out with the previous week's results right away on Monday morning. So those reports are available to everyone who is part of the survey group. And we are continuing to do that, and we'll continue to do that for the foreseeable future, because it's been a very good piece of information for us to use when advocating on your behalf. So without any further questions, we will let you get on to the rest of your day. Have a great 4th of July weekend, and stay safe, and we will talk to you next week.